Hi everybody and welcome to the Saturday Surface Interval in association with Mpora, but more about them later. So what should every new scuba diver have? So when you're just starting out, it can feel like you may need to invest in just everything, which can feel quite imposing, or you might not need to invest in anything at all, which can actually end up being more expensive for you in the long run with rental fees. But what is worth investing in first? From time to time, I've upgraded certain items of mine over the years and I've replaced others, but there are some things in the middle that I've kept throughout my entire diving career. So let's take a closer look at what is definitely worth investing in when you're just starting out. The first thing is a good logbook. You'll often get a basic logbook when you first start out, but you'll soon find out that you fill that up fairly quickly. So it's best that you find, or at least come up with, a good way to log your dives in the future. So do some planning and think about a storage system for your logbooks. The traditional way is just to buy a logbook, you go scuba diving, you then fill them up, and as you run out of space, you just buy another book. Now, there's nothing particularly wrong with that system, but I do find it a little bit tricky at times to refer back to specific dives. I use my logs to actually keep track of how much lead I need in particular areas in ever-changing exposure protection. My logbooks start at dive 1 and they just continue upwards, but trying to go back through them and find one particular dive can be tricky because my dives alternate between cold water dives in fresh water and then in salt water and then warm water and then back to cold with different settings. There's no obvious structure to them, so referring back to one particular dive can be a little tricky. So another way to do it is to have one book per area or type of dive. So you can have one book that is just for your cold water diving or just for your single tanks in salt water. You can then have a completely separate book for traveling abroad and so on. That way you can better reference for your next trip. I also recommend loose pages instead of an actual bound book. I like to be able to keep the pages organized and kind of rearrange them. And that way I don't need to bring any more pages than I need to on a holiday. If I'm going away, I can take with me exactly enough pages for my trip and then 1 or 2 logged pages for reference and continuity. That way I only bring sort of what I need. I don't have to bring the entire book or sort of folder or whatever you're keeping them in. You can keep it nice and small for when you're traveling. Your mask, I'll wager, is on every single what should you buy first list because as a diver, it is your most personal and important piece of equipment. If you're going to buy anything for your scuba diving, then I would definitely recommend buying your own mask. There are a few reasons why owning your own mask is important, but for me, the most important reason is that rental masks are a bit rubbish, to be honest. Dive centers and schools, they aren't going to invest in a range of really expensive fancy masks with the finest of features. They're just going to have a pretty cheap and basic mask if they're just renting it out and handing it to complete strangers. So they're going to be pretty basic. Your mask will fit you comfortably and will give you a better view of the underwater world. If you look after your mask, it will follow you throughout your entire scuba diving career. If you ever decide to progress onto twin cylinders or side mount, rebreathers, nitrox, cave diving, you name it, you can always use the same mask. Other kit, if you do sort of move around, needs to be upgraded and changed, but your mask will always be your mask. So if you get a good one when you first start out, then it'll last you for years and years. No matter which direction you end up going, you'll still have your mask. Today's episode of the Saturday Surface Interval is sponsored by Mpora. Mpora is an online magazine that is all about inspiring adventure, whether that adventure involves sliding around on a snowy mountain, pulling yourself up on a climbing wall, riding your bike through wooded trails, surfing barrels down at the beach, and yes, of course, exploring the underwater world on Scuba. It is a website that has got you covered. Mpora has interviews, previews, reviews, news, everything that you need to be clued up on the big outdoor issues. It's got the lot, so definitely check out Mpora. One of the greatest advancements in scuba diving has been the invention and availability of dive computers. A dive computer is a safety device that pretty much it takes all of the timing and the calculating and maths out of your diving. Diving by tables is an arduous and boring affair, but a dive computer is always thinking and is always working things out for you. A dive computer has one primary job on this world, and that is to get you back to the surface safely, and it will tell you if you're about to do something wrong. If you start to dive a little bit too deep, then it will beep at you to get your attention. If you start to ascend a bit too fast, it will tell you. If you stay down for too long, it'll tell you, and it is always thinking and always trying to get you back to the surface safely. And having your very own dive computer is so very important because you're going to understand how it works. If you're renting a dive computer, they're all going to be slightly different. You can work out most things, but if you just get this random pop-up message and you don't understand it, then it's not going to be that great. Whereas if you have your own dive computer, you know exactly what it's trying to tell you, and that way you can get back to the surface safely. Another very important piece of kit that has very quickly grown in popularity over recent years and is now considered an essential piece of kit is a surface marker buoy. Now, I always bring at least one surface marker buoy with me on every single dive because they greatly increase your visibility in the water so that others can see you better. Every scuba diver should really have their own delayed surface marker buoy and a reel or spool to go with it. A DSMB, or a delayed surface marker buoy, goes with you on the dive, and when you're coming to the end of that dive, you attach it onto your spool and then inflate it so that shoots up to the surface. That way, boats in the area can see where you are even when you're under the water. The earlier you can get your own DSMB and spool is better because you can learn how to use it properly, because it is a bit of a skill the first few times, so if you can get it early, it's much better. Now, the choice of reel or spool is a personal one, but more divers are choosing for spools today because they're a little bit more compact and they just have fewer moving parts. Reels will have ratchet spools to wind the line back in quite easily, but if you're not holding onto it properly, it can lock and then yank the whole reel out of your hands. Spools have the opposite traits. They're a little bit fiddly to wind on, but there's no moving parts, so they can't lock. The only downside is just don't let go of them, otherwise they can just unravel all the way down to the bottom. But most people tend to prefer spools. They're a little bit easier, especially when you're traveling. So yeah, it's definitely worth investing in a DSMB and a spool. Your fins are much like your mask. They'll be on everyone's buy this first list, and they will stick with you for many, many years to come if you pick the right ones and you look after them as well. The important thing is not to buy the very first pair of fins that you see that just look cool. You kind of need to decide what kind of diver you want to become and then go down that route as early as possible so you don't invest too much going down the wrong direction. If you know that you are only ever planning to be a traveling warm water diver, that's great. You will only ever need a lightweight pair of fins, and you might actually be able to get away with a pair of full foot fins if you're not planning anything too strenuous. So if you do some basic research online and you read that a lot of divers like a heavy fin like the Hollis F1 fin, and you invest in a pair because everyone says they're great, then you've gone a little bit too far in the wrong direction, because a heavy chunky fin like the F1 is a bit much for a warm water traveling diver, and they'll just eat up your baggage allowance. On the flip side of things, if you think you want to be a roughy-tufty diver in a dry suit exploring in really rough environments, then you don't want a flimsy pair of fins that won't fight in a current. So before you go out and just invest in a pair of fins, do a little bit of thinking and you may be able to save yourself some money in the long run. And the old adage of buy cheap, buy twice also comes into play with fins too. If you buy a cheap pair of fins that break after a couple sessions, then you might as well have invested that money in a better pair, and that way you're going to end up buying the better pair in the end anyway. So there were a few scuba diving essentials for new scuba divers. If you're ever trying to round up an order by a small amount, then a decent bolt snap is always a good thing just to add into your basket to round it up. Don't forget to check out Mpora for some cool outdoorsy content, and of course subscribe to the Simply Scuba channel for more content like this. Thank you for watching and safe diving.